Okay, good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining us for this breakout session on university and health-related institution budgeting and financial management. My name is Sarah Keaton and I serve as the Associate Commissioner for Administration at the Coordinating Board. And I'm pleased to moderate this session today. We have a really great panel here of experts in this area to talk about this today. They represent a wealth and breadth of experience and expertise, and I'm really excited to kind of have a chance for them to share their perspectives with you all today. I'd like to start the discussion by having each of them just do a brief introduction of themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm Andrea Marks. I'm the Chief Operating Officer from the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio. I'm what you call a UT lifer, so I graduated from UT and started working at UT. I've been with the system for more than 30 years. I started at UT Austin and about 20 years ago moved to the Health Science Center. Served in many roles there, mostly finance. I was the chief financial officer for about 9 years. And then 3 years ago, I became the chief operating officer and included in my portfolio IT, HR, facilities, all of the fun stuff that incorporate operations. Great to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Eric Algo. I'm currently the Vice President for Finance and Support Services at Texas State University. I've been there for about 7.5 years. I've had the privilege to serve in a similar role at Florida State University and Ohio Wesleyan University before that. Prior to coming into higher education, I spent 16 years in the military as an Army officer, and I am a graduate of the Ohio State University with both of my degrees.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, my name is Joseph Duran, and I'm with the A&M System Office. And I guess, like Andrew, I'm a lifer as well. I started working for the A&M system when I was 19 years old as a student worker, and met my wife there, and we just never left. So, my roles, I started out at the university as a staff accountant, then went over to the system in 1995. Been there since, and in my role, I've been a financial analyst, budget director, just done a whole lot of different things. As a budget person, you're involved in a lot of broad range of topics, and honestly, that's what makes why I enjoy my job. And so today, I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the system, and we just do whatever we need to do while we're there.
Thanks so much. So if we could kind of start the discussion, and Joseph, I'll start this one with you. If you could talk a little bit about, in general terms, the types and sources of revenue that institutions of higher education have.
Thank you, Sarah. So, at the A&M system, we're a very diverse system. We have 11 universities, 8 state agencies, a system office, and then 1 comprehensive health science center. And so when you look at us, our agencies are very different from our academics. Our agencies are very heavy in federal revenues that they get, especially our ag agencies. They do get some general revenue for operations, and also now for the last, I think it's 2 years now, we have TDEM. You've probably heard of them, our Texas Division of Emergency Management. They've been in the news a lot lately, especially with COVID and moving past COVID. They handle a lot of federal revenue that's passed through, that comes to them, that gets distributed to our local municipalities, state agencies, etc. But when we look at, I know most of us are familiar with our academics, and when you look at our 11 academics, our total revenue budget's just over $7 billion, and over half of that is related to our academics. And when you think about how academics are funded, obviously you think about tuition and fees and state appropriations. So with that, our academic revenue is just over $4 billion. And of that, over half is funded by state appropriations and tuition and fees. It's approximately, tuition and fees are about 2/3 of that, $1.6 billion. State appropriations provide the other 37%, or almost $1.971 billion. So when you think about our academics, big drivers there are going to be tuition and fees and state appropriations that we get from the state legislature. But in addition to all that, we rely on investment income, investment earnings. It's a small part of our budget, especially now. You look at the market; it's very volatile, and so what used to be a nice revenue stream now is a little uncertain. And so when we look for this year, system wide, we budgeted just what I write here, $138 million or 3% of our budget. But then in addition, we've got Pell Grant revenue that comes in, that's financial aid provided to students. So you got Pell Grant revenue, you got state grant revenue that comes in. That taken together is almost $900 million. It's about 8% of our budget. We also have gift revenue that we rely on. And so most of our members are very conservative in how they budget our gifts for the year. For the academics, we budget about $198 million, almost $200 million, or 4% of the total. And also, when we look at the A&M system, we're diverse in that we have some schools that are HEAP schools, and they get funding from the Higher Education Fund. And also, we have our PUF schools, our Permanent University Fund schools. So we have 6 universities that are HEAP, and the other 5 are PUF schools. So when you think about our PUF schools, we got the flagship in College Station. We have Prairie View A&M University, A&M San Antonio, A&M Central Texas, and then Tarleton State University. And then the rest of our members are our HEAP schools. So it's a diverse method of finance and how we pay our bills. But obviously state appropriations and tuition fees play a big part in how we pay our bills.
Great, thanks. And Andrea, can you talk a little bit about how that mix might differ for a health-related institution?
Sure. So the being part of the UT system, we're part of 14 institutions, but as a health-related institution, there are about 2/3 of the UT system budget is in the health-related institutions. UT Health San Antonio, we're a health-related. The primary difference in our proportion of funding is in the clinical mission, and so we see probably 50% of our budget come from clinical practice. And what that mission serves is, in addition to caring for the community through patient care, we also do clinical research. And these sites, through sites that we own, clinical practices that we own, as well as affiliations with hospital partners and with other outpatient partners, those represent training sites for our students and our residents. And so it's a really important ecosystem. We are fundamentally, first and foremost, an educational institution. But in order to attract the top faculty, to attract the best students in Texas, we need to provide an ecosystem that includes scholarship, that includes research, and also includes practice. And so we strive very hard to create this ecosystem to attract the faculty. The training sites are critically important. Trainees want to practice in very robust experiences so they can get into the workforce and be the best doctors, nurses, dentists they can be. At UT Health, as I said, our portfolio, 50% of our portfolio of funding comes from the clinical mission, compared to the general academics, where there is a heavy emphasis on state appropriation. Our appropriation from general revenue and from tuition is about 20%. The balance of our portfolio, around 25%, comes from research, so extramurally funded research, mostly in the biomedical sciences. And then 5%, just like at A&M, comes from philanthropy and from investment income. So it's a slightly different mix. I think it's important for regents to understand the portfolio, not because you need to be in the weeds on how the economics of the institution works, but how those economics are impacted by policy decisions. So when you think about federal policy, state policy, whether it's healthcare reimbursement, decisions that are made at the federal or state level, programs that the state participates in from a regulatory perspective for federal healthcare reimbursement are important for the health-related institutions, as are decisions around tuition, around general revenue formulas.
Thanks so much. And kind of speaking of formulas, I know we hear a lot about formula funding in the context of state appropriations and state funding. So, Eric, can you talk a little bit about the higher education formulas?
Happy to, and I'll do it without using hardly any numbers, right? And I won't show you a spreadsheet either. So they threw that at me as an added challenge. No spreadsheets. So we just heard that between 20 and 35% of the funding for institutions of higher education come from the state. So the state legislature appropriates a certain amount of money to fund higher education. What the formula does is it answers the question, how are we going to divide that up? So there's so much money available, and the formula provides a way that is fair and transparent to determine how much each institution is going to receive. At its heart, the formula looks at the number of students you have in different categories. So how many freshman English majors do you have? How many MBA students do you have? How many, and I'm using number of students, it's actually number of semester credit hours, but how many students do you have that are studying for a PhD in mechanical engineering? And those things have different weights. The weight in the formula that everything is based around is that freshman liberal arts major. They get a weight of 1. That weight of 1 is multiplied by a certain dollar amount that is set by the legislature every 2 years. Currently, that's around $56 per semester credit hour. So one freshman English major taking 1 3 credit hour class would get 3 times $56. That's how much the institution would receive. You look at somebody who's in, let's say, a pharmacy doctoral program, and they're taking that same 3 semester credit hour class. They may be weighted as much as 15 times more than the freshman English major. So there you would take 15 times 3 semester credit hours times $56. I said I wouldn't use many numbers. Sorry.
Can't help it.
Yeah, can't help it. So this is at its heart the way the formula works. You can then take all of those numbers from all of the enrollments across every public institution in the state of Texas, and everybody kind of gets a score, right? Depending on how many students you have taking all these different sorts of classes, you get a score. That score then is used to determine the ratio of the available money that the legislature has given that your institution will receive. So at its heart, the formula is driven mostly by enrollment data. Now, obviously, when you do that, you reward growth, right? So the bigger you are, the more you get. The formula also includes something called a small institution component. So if you're a small institution and you're not going to be growing, the state does have a way in the formula to give you some money to sort of make sure that you're doing okay as well. The third component of the formula has to do with space. So you also get about $5 or $6 per square foot of space that you have to support the mission of the university, of the institution. So that's not all space, right? Your housing is not sort of core. The state doesn't pay for your housing. The state doesn't pay for your dining halls. The state doesn't pay for different, but your core classrooms, research labs, those sorts of things, library, the state does give you that $5 or $6 per square foot. So that's the next part of the formula. They give you, there's some proportion that you get around space. And then finally, the final portion of the formula has to do with research. Depending on how much research your institution does, externally funded research primarily, you're going to get a ratio, a proportion of the money the state has set aside to support research. So again, the more you do, the bigger share you're going to get in order to support the institution. One of the interesting criticisms of the formula historically is that it does primarily reward inputs versus outputs. So in other words, it's about getting more students on the campus. It's not about awarding more degrees. And so the state does continue and has for many years to talk about performance-based funding. In the coordinating board advisory committee, which is a group of the best and brightest people around the state that get together and try to make this formula, which is already the envy of many other states, even better every 2 years. They do have suggestions around success or performance-based funding where we can give institutions additional funds for graduating, in particular, at-risk students. Now, how you define at-risk is tricky, and what that amount would be is tricky, but we are aware of the fact that the formula should also include some outcomes-based funding. It's not in there today, but it is one of the recommendations for the Formula Advisory Committee moving forward.
Thanks so much. And Andrea, can you talk a little bit about the health-related formulas and how they differ from those general academic formulas?
Sure. So they are, they are fundamentally the same as what Eric described in terms of their goal to fund enrollment, or they're based on enrollment, they're based on infrastructure and research. But they are completely different formulas. So we don't compete in the same pools, if you will, with the general academics. The health-related institutions have a pot for state appropriation that runs through their formulas. And so, as I said, there's those three main components. The largest, those are the three main formulas that all health-related institutions participate in. The largest one, 70% of the formula, is dedicated to instruction and operations, which is fed by enrollment. Like the general academic, it rewards growth. The calculation is, it's not by semester credit hour, it's by full-time student equivalent, which is calculated based on semester credit hours for some. For the professionals, it's essentially head count. When I say professional, I mean medical, dental, those types of professional degrees. So it does reward, though, growth for those larger, for growing institutions. Whether you're large or small, you get a larger proportion as you grow. You're able to pull down more of the formula. There are other formulas dedicated to specific initiatives that are important to the state, like general medical education. So graduate medical education for residents to bring more doctors to Texas and to fund the education and training of more doctors. And so there's a GME formula. There's also a formula that is called mission specific. For years, those were dedicated to specific institutions. So MD Anderson had a cancer center operations formula. UTMB had a health system operation formula for all of the public work that they do in healthcare. And then UT Health Tyler had a formula related to chest disease. The last 2 biennials ago, the legislature approved a mission-specific formula related to research. The goal was to enhance research, to reward institutions who were growing in research. It's called performance-based research operations. It was a pilot the first biennium. It was approved as a permanent formula in the last biennium. So there are 6 institutions that participate in the performance-based research operations formula, and it is intended to reward institutions for growth in research, in addition to the research formula that exists today. I think, like the calculation, the math works very similar in terms of there's a rate associated and a weight. So an allied health student is 1, and a medical student is 4.7 times the weight of an allied health student in terms of cost. And it's driven because of the cost of medical education is greater than the cost of an allied health education. In terms of, should the formula, how should the formula be managed? There's also a formula advisory committee for health-related institutions. I was the chair of that, so I'm not sure it's the greatest minds in Texas. I was the chair of that a few sessions ago, but it is all of the experts who are deep in the weeds on the formula, understand the formula. I think where we saw some modifications, improvements, enhancements that needed to be considered in the formula were for those mature institutions who were not growing at an accelerated rate, but had established programs, quality programs producing health-related healthcare workers. We really needed to find a way for the formula to not penalize those because they weren't in growth mode. One way to do that is to keep the rate consistent. for the formula so that you can predict what you're going to get. Every year the rate in the formula changes based on the money that's available. And so that's detrimental mostly to those who are not growing. So that's it.
Thank you. And switching gears a little bit, I know we've kind of heard in a couple other breakout sessions this morning and this afternoon talking about the role of regents and the governance structure for higher education. And Joseph, wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role of boards of regents, particularly as it relates to budget issues and financial management.
Okay. So, you know, at the system office, what we do is a lot of due diligence for our board members. And so when we look at, obviously, one of the things we spend a lot of time on, and you can probably guess, is tuition and fees, right? That's always, something that we're going to spend time discussing. Kind of the way it works at the A&M system is we usually approve it in November, but the discussions start much sooner. We reach out to the members, to the academic members, and we find out what their needs are, what their priorities are, what they're thinking, what they're looking to propose. It comes to the A&M system office, and that's where we vet it. And so we go through the numbers, we look at the impact on students. Once we vet those, we look at if there are any referendums that are going to be required, did they have it, did they hold public hearings? So we make sure that those things happen. And then we start having what we call these, in the fall, there's football games in College Station. So when they're in town, we try to, schedule some time where we can meet one-on-one with them. And when I say with them, with just a few, can't have a quorum, but when we get like 3 at a time, and we'll just go over the proposals. We'll bring the presidents in, and they'll be able to share their thoughts. And we'll do that over, 2-3 weeks, over 2 or 3 weeks, and just one day at a time, one day a week. And so we spend a lot of time discussing tuition and fees. We also, when we look at kind of just the management of the budget, we spend a lot of time each year getting prepared, approving the budget. And I noticed one of our regents was here in the previous session, Regent Mendoza, and she's very engaged in the budget and in our enrollment and retention. And so usually it's over a two-day period. We'll have what we call our programmatic budget reviews, where all the regents are here or in town. Our presidents show up, and they go over not just their operating, their needs for the next year, but they go over enrollment, they go over their retention, they go over graduation rates. We talk about things from not only capital planning, deferred maintenance, but salary plans. And we now, we call them our employee retention plans, because really they're plans to retain our good employees. And so we talk about reserve balances. We look historically, number of months of reserves, what's adequate, what's not. So it's a long 2 days, and everyone's usually real tired. Our chancellor requires all of our presidents to be there from beginning to end, and it really adds for some good dialogue. And there's some questions that come up that really everyone needs to hear. And so we're all there. As I always say, we're one big family, and so we spend a good 2 days going over the budget that's going to be presented at the next board meeting. So then when we get to the next board meeting, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time going through the numbers. We can provide a high-level overview and get through that meeting. In addition, we also provide what we call our financial status report. So coming up in February, we'll look back at the previous year in FY22, and we'll compare. This is what we budgeted. This is how we ended the year. Were we over or under budget? We'll compare. We'll look at revenues. We'll look at expenses. We'll also look at what we call just kind of the financial condition of each of our members. And with that, we use what we call there's an index we call our composite CFI index, our composite financial index, and it takes into account 3 financial ratios. We have a balance sheet ratio, we have an income statement ratio, we have a debt ratio, and a reserve ratio, and it's a blending of those 3 that puts out we calculate what we call an index, and our target is a 3.0. And so if you're above a 3, we're looking good. If you're below, we just want to know why. We provide the explanations of why. And a lot of times it's just it's a planned use of maybe reserves. They had a capital project that came on that they, construction that they started using some of the reserves that they had been setting aside in previous years that they're now spending. So we go through that with each of them. So we have a pretty thorough process that we provide them. It's a lot of fun.
It's always interesting.
Yep.
Right. And Eric, kind of on that theme of different roles of different people in this process, can you talk a little bit about the role that the CFO plays within an institution of higher education?
Yeah, happy to. And especially for those of you who may be new incoming trustees, I think it's best described by talking about sort of the big four leadership roles at any institution of higher education, traditional university or college in particular. Of course, the president, who's the employee of the actual board itself, is there to provide the vision, the strategy, to be the spokesperson and leader for the university. The provost of the university is typically going to be the person who's overseeing the actual education and research at the university. You're going to have somebody in charge of student affairs, the overall health and wellness of the student body outside of the classroom. And everything else is the CFO. So that's maybe the easiest way to say it. Typically, in many institutions, this will be it might be two people that share these roles. Some, it's one person. But you're going to oversee finances, facilities, and people. So all of the employees of the institution, those three things. It's the CFO's job to provide information to the CEO and through the CEO to the system and the board, the overall picture for the financial future and health of the institution. And Joseph, I loved a lot of what he talked about there. It sort of as just sort of touch points for, as you think about as a trustee or a regent, sort of that role, to ask the questions, to the universities. How do you know you're doing okay? How do you measure financial health? How do you know that your students are learning? You don't have to know what the right way to do that is, but asking those good questions is always a great idea. So first and foremost, and the easiest part of a CFO's job is to do the things you typically associate with, your chief accounting person with their green visor and all of that. Pay the bills, keep the lights on, make sure compliance is in order, contracts are cut, and those sorts of things. Lots of that is automated, and we're pretty good at it these days, and that shouldn't occupy too much of your time. More importantly is this fundamental issue of, once the strategies have been set at the institution, how are we going to achieve the strategy? This is where the role of the CFO really comes squarely into the front, because at its heart, the job is about resource allocation. And I said the three things that we oversee: money, space, and people. No matter what you're trying to do, those are the three ways that you get it done. And so the how question of how we're going to get things done is something that the CFO plays an important role in. Running all of the businesses of the university. So it's important to understand that the state formula supports only the core mission of the university: teaching and research. Lots of other things happen at a university, right? We house students. We sell stuff in a bookstore. We feed students. Many of us run parking operations and public transit operations and athletics operations and all those sorts of things. Those are non-state supported businesses, and somebody has to run all of those businesses. So that's an important role of the CFO. In many institutions, also the entrepreneurial and economic development opportunities of the institution, a lot of the community engagement pieces. If you're going to build a hotel, a retail strip mall, research and laboratory incubators, we heard earlier about wet lab space that's available to the private sector, public-private partnerships. those sorts of things. When you boil it all down, the role of the CFO is to chart the answer to the question about how we're going to achieve the goals in the future, to manage the risk associated with the way we're going to get there, and to ensure that the institution maintains or improves its financial health on the journey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Andrea, please do.
So just to elaborate on that, I think one of the things that our board and our system office does well when you think about exactly that responsibility about charting the future for the organization is every proposal that we make to our system, to our board for a new building, a significant investment requires a business plan. It requires a pro forma, a look ahead to see how will the institution sustain the initiative, fund the initiative. We are fortunate that we have access to PUF, like the A&M system does, so that we can make those investments. But those are one-time investments to actually start the capital project, but we have to ensure that it is sustainable. Being in public service, and operating many of our missions as a business, they don't all break even. And so some of them actually lose money, but we need to do them. And so it's important that we understand where that portfolio of funding for sustainability will come from. And so we're required to demonstrate that as an institution. And one of the things that we've started at UT System is sort of a 10-year forecast, particularly for institutions who are in heavy growth mode, looking at 10 years ahead. And granted, 10 years is a long time. A lot can happen, but we keep it a living document. We started ours probably 2 years ago. We've probably updated it twice since then when significant events have happened, and they've been favorable. So we've been able to prove to the system that we've beat our budget and we are still on plan. But it's important that the CFO have the pulse of that and give that confidence to the system and the board that that planning is occurring.
Yeah, thanks so much for those comments kind of around financial planning and best practices, around budget issues. And kind of on that theme, one thing I know that comes up a lot with institutions of higher education is talking about facilities and space, and particularly deferred maintenance, and kind of how deferred maintenance is handled over time. And Joseph, I don't know if you can touch on a little bit about how deferred maintenance is handled at A&M.
Sure, Sarah. So, my boss said, this is going back 10 years ago, he was like, I thought, he said, when I got here, I thought we educated students, but we actually just build a lot of buildings. And so, which we do educate a lot of students, and we do build a lot of buildings. And so with that buildings comes, we talk about deferred maintenance. And so back in 2018, our regents asked the question, what are we doing about deferred maintenance? How much deferred maintenance do we have? So we the board created a special committee on deferred maintenance, and we looked at, so I was in charge of that committee, of the committee that they created. And we started with what is deferred maintenance. And I don't know if you know what deferred maintenance is, but if you look around your house, like I started doing, you see a lot of deferred maintenance. And really all it is it's maintenance that you should have already done, but you didn't because of financial reasons. You just didn't have the money to do it. So you deferred it. I'll do that next year, or I'll do that tomorrow, or in 6 months. But really that's what it is. So first task was, kind of educating our folks on what is deferred maintenance, and then looking at, well, how much do we have? So when we did some internal report, an internal look, and we had over $1 billion system-wide of deferred maintenance. So almost $1 billion, it was 1.2 billion. Almost 900 million was related to our educational facilities. And so the other, 300, almost 400 million was related to our auxiliaries. And so when you look at that, that's a lot of deferred maintenance. So when the board, says, hey, I want y'all to do something about it, get a handle on it. Folks like Eric as a CFO, they can get a little stressed because it's a lot of money. So what I would share with our CFOs is, look, we're not asking you to get rid of all your deferred maintenance tomorrow. But what we are asking you to do is make sure, number one, you know how much you have, where is it, and that you have a plan. So that plan needs to be identifying your deferred maintenance, prioritizing your deferred maintenance, which are the items that you need to knock off sooner rather than later. And then, as Eric would say, then the hard part is allocating the resources. And so what we've asked all of our CFOs is, look, your job is to have a plan. And with that, so we already know how much we have, but when we look forward, Andrea mentioned this with capital construction. One of the things our board requires now as a result of this study that we did is you have, before you bring something to the board for construction approval, you have to have what we're calling a facilities maintenance plan. In other words, what's your plan to handle the maintenance in year 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, so that you don't have ever deferred maintenance on that building. And with that comes allocation of resources. So that's one of the things that they put into place. The other thing we did, and I'll just make this quick, is we did an RFP where we brought in an outside consultant, Gordian, and they're a nationwide company that they do this. So we've been working with them the last 3 years on helping us not only identify our deferred maintenance, but how to track it, how to help prioritize and allocate resources. And they've been a great partner with us.
Oh, thanks so much. So this might be a little bit of a preview for our last session this afternoon, but kind of thinking ahead to the next legislative session, there could be a pretty significant budget surplus available for the legislature. Eric, could you talk a little bit about, I know every institution of higher education has their own priorities, but there are some common themes across institutions that are priorities for state funding. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Love to, and I consulted with my fellow panelists on how we will answer this question. So earlier I talked about the formula, right? And I think I mentioned that Texas is the envy of many states in that we do have a fair and transparent way to give money to institutions of higher education, whether they be health related, general academic, or if you were in the other session, community colleges, or our state colleges, right? 4 different formula approaches. So that's a great thing, and it serves us really well. We also have other great programs in Texas that are the envy of many other states, like the Texas Grant Program that provides up to $5,000 for every low-income student to use, to kind of shop around and finance their own education. Great programs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we bring people together on a regular basis to help figure out how to make them even better. However, and you knew there was a but coming to all of this, the state has a lot of competing priorities. Even when you have a $27 billion, I heard this morning, estimated surplus going into the session, there's a lot of things that the legislature is going to be asked to fund and fix. And $27 billion doesn't go as far as you think when you have a state as big as Texas. So what happens is that those needs of higher education are stacked up against many other needs. Here's the thing I didn't tell you about the formula earlier. Remember when I said that it's $56 per semester credit hour and $5 or $6 per square foot of space? That's what the state told us to put together a formula to figure out how much we should get. That is not what the state gives us, okay? So what the state gives us is what they can afford to give us. And then the formula doesn't actually give you $56 times your weighted semester credit hours. It gives you a share of the available pot that's, determined using the formula. So what you will hear, I believe, almost any CFO of any institution of higher ed in Texas say, and what I hope that I invite all of you as future trustees, if that's your role, or regents to say, is if you're ever asked, what can the state legislature do to better support higher education in the state of Texas? It's a simple answer: fully fund the formula. The formula was crested in terms of its weight to support students in Texas in 2012. It has declined ever since. We've had pretty good years financially, even during COVID in the state of Texas since then. And the reason for that is because you'll be able to see a chart that says, what are you talking about? We continue to give more and more money to higher education. It's just going up, up, up. But between inflation and enrollment growth, it's not going up nearly enough. And so the amount of money that's being provided to higher education on a per student basis, it has dwindled for the past decade. So fully funding the formula to include enrollment growth and inflation, and then similarly with programs like Texas Grants that put the buying power in the student's hand. That program was initiated in 2011. In 2011, soon to be a dozen years ago, then the amount was set at $5,000. 12 years later, the amount is $5,000. So these programs we have in Texas, in summary, they're the envy of most other states. We don't have to come up with a new way to fund higher education, which may be a bigger challenge, for example, in K-12 education in Texas, right? We have the formula, we have the plan. Now it's about funding the plan and the formula that we've created.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I would invite, Andrea and Joseph to add any additional comments
Ditto.
that y'all want to make. Ditto. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll just say that, as Eric mentioned, when we look at what could the state do, obviously is put more dollars into the formula. That helps all of higher education. We've asked, there was a new initiative that started this last biennium for it's called the Comprehensive Regional Universities, and that's for the 27 regional universities across the state. We've asked that, this last biennium, $20 million was put in there for 1 year, and it was half the amount. So for a full biennium, that would be $80 million, $40 million per year. And that money goes directly, as I think Eric mentioned, it, help at-risk kids. And it's, when I talk to my CFOs, I'm saying, look, that money that you receive, number one, we want to see a plan, and it's not to supplant money you're already using. It's to enhance things like advising and keeping kids in the pipeline, counseling, employment counseling, helping them not only recruiting the student, but also getting them to graduation, helping them find employment opportunities when they get out. So those dollars are very helpful to our regional universities. Any assistance they can provide for what's called HEGI, the Higher Education Group Insurance dollars, helping employ the universities pay for the health insurance costs for their employees is also critical.
The one thing that I'll just to enhance what Eric said about funding the formulas, the reason that we need the formulas funded is because they fund operations. They fund the educational operations, the research operations, and we are competing nationally for faculty. While we're a public institution serving Texas, our faculty come from everywhere, and we want the best and the brightest to come to Texas. Texas is already the #1 state in the union. I think we all agree with that. But we need to stay there. And so competing with the coast, we have to bring bright students. Bright students come for bright faculty. What I'm seeing recently is that we are now competing nationally for staff, for administrators, because people, particularly in research administration, there is a phenomenon going on across the country where research administrators can change institutions and not leave their couch because they are working remote. In this new future of work, people can change jobs, and folks in IT, in research administration, in HR are able to change. We have lost a number of folks, particularly in research administration, to the California system. And so we're seeing ourselves, and they didn't leave San Antonio, but are now working for UCSD and UCSF. So what we're seeing is this need to our costs are going up. We have to compete. We want the best and the brightest, but it is across the board in terms of personnel. And 70%, our capital is intellectual, right? We don't produce widgets. We have our faculty, our staff, our leaders that's 70% of our budget is this intellectual capital. So we need to invest in that, and the state is an important component of how we do that.
Thank you so much. And I think we've got a little over 5 minutes, right at about 5 minutes left for questions if there are any questions. Dr.
My
Frias.
question is, why are some institutions, professional doctor programs, not health-related institutions formally funded? There is a general Stanford University, which they're doing medical school, and then pharmacy and health professions of the doctor's program. They're not part of it. Is that legislative move, or have you changed that, or anything from general academic public funding to HRI?
Can you answer that?
Yeah, so that is a legislative determination. So the legislature chooses kind of the formula structure and which institutions, you know, are included in which formula and the rates for those. And I don't know if anyone has anything they want to add
I would
on
just
that,
say
but yeah.
it's similarly, Joseph mentioned the comprehensive research universities, right? This is a new fund of money that, again, the legislature determined these are the 27 schools that participate in that funding. There's other analogies with sort of the state has designated certain universities as research universities. There are 8 of those. So yeah, those are legislative questions.
Any other questions from the group? No? Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I know we're happy to kind of stick around up here at the front if anybody has any questions they want to ask, but not in front of the whole group. And otherwise, we can end a couple minutes early. And please join me in thanking the panel for their time today. Thank you.
Also, if they get some competition resources, if they get that program and they put it in the HRI, it's taking the money away